Due to the nature of this map, we don't have other radios than the 343, so just stick with it.
Don't worry. Yeah, generally speaking, we probably won't need the radios anyways. But
Unless we need to like split up on the line, firing lines.
yeah. But at that point, only the instructors will be using radios unless it's relevant or urgent. Anyways, welcome to the day of weapons training. First, we'll be going over certain aspects of shooting, certain characteristics that pertain to ballistics, and weaponry itself. And then we'll actually get some range time with the weapons on which you will qualify. Each of you will probably get around 1 to 2 practice magazines with each weapon, or practice set of grenades / explosives. Okay.
Hey guys, also quick for future reference. Yeah, mainly this is actually just for esham, but it kind of goes for everybody. No camo faces during training.
Copy.
Alright, Alanis? There he is. Okay, everyone's here. Let's start.
Hang on,
first...
somebody timed out.
No,
Yeah,
he
know.
just came back. I'm
Okay.
on top of it, don't worry.
You let the instructors worry about that.
First, we'll go over the basic elements of a good shot. Primary elements which will affect your weapon's stability and thus accuracy in Arma 2 and Ace are stamina, posture, wounds, breath control, weapon support, and then other effects like distance, wind.
Natural stuff.
Yeah. First, stamina. I don't know, have you guys ever run around with 50 kilos of stuff and find out you can't go very far?
Yep.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's stamina for you. Once you, if you go too far, even with like 30 kilos or less, you'll eventually start getting more and more tired. So conserving your stamina and taking halts during long movements or something like that is always a good idea. Another thing which will affect your stamina consumption is the weight you carry. I would usually prefer not going above 40 kilograms, otherwise it starts getting sketchy. Generally my loadouts are anywhere from 30 to 40, but it's up to you how big of a compromise you want to go with. Also, route planning is important here. Going up steep inclines will get rid of stamina a lot faster. Yeah. So that's stamina. Next up, we have posture. With SMK, we have a lot more variety, especially in the kneeling stances. What you'll find out is that you will have three types of crouch. You will have, if you press it once, you will go into crouched. Press it again from there, you'll go into kneeling. Kneeling is more accurate than crouched, and if you at either of those two postures press the V button or the vault over button, you will go into sniper sit, which is almost as stable as prone. Prone being the most stable by default. So keep your keep your shooting posture in mind. Wounds, obviously, if you get shot in the arms, usually wounds which hinder shooting are indicated by bloody arms. Your aim is going to be very shaky. Also, if you play a lot of Insurgency and you've been rolling around for like 4 hours or even over an hour, you've been wounded, you've always first aided yourself, but your aim is still very shaky even when you're at full rest, then you need to go to a med tent. It's still tied to the Ace medical system, and you need to heal yourself at the med tent to gain 100% combat effectiveness.
Basically, what he's getting at is that healing in the field is not going to get you to 100%.
Yeah.
So you'll still be relatively stable to be combat effective, but if you want to be at 100%, you'll have to RTB.
Next thing, breath control. If you hold right click, you will zoom in. Another side effect of this is that it will hold your breath. If you hold your breath for too long, your character, obviously being a human imitation, will need to gasp for air, at which point your aim will be thrown off completely. Which is why it's recommended to hold right click for as little of a time as possible. A way to still get the zoom but not hold your breath is to bind your zoom button, which by default is numpad plus, to something else, but that's up to you how you want to finagle with the controls.
One thing that I like to do personally is keep the bind of numpad plus, but if you double tap it, the zoom will stick.
Yeah.
And then to zoom back out, you hit numpad minus. So if you have something like a CCO or a holographic sight and you double tap numpad plus, you'll get the zoom and it'll stay. And then you can control your breathing as you need to.
And obviously the breath control will apply to scope weapons as well. It's just that you don't get the added zoom effect because your scope is already magnifying what you see. So right click, very important. Weapon support. In Ace, you can support your weapon on pretty much any physical object in the world. You can even support your weapon on a squad mate if they're in the correct position. However, that renders that squad mate ineffective due to the posture he needs to be in. But it is possible. You do this by trying to make sure your weapon is resting on a piece of wall or something similar, and hold left shift and press space. The game may lag momentarily when you press it. Just don't move about, and it'll basically do a check for anything you can support on. If it deploys the weapon or supports it on a wall, you will hear a click, and you will see on the top left it says weapons reported. At this point, your range of movement will be limited, or range of moving the weapon will be limited. It will be slower, but you will be a heck of a lot more accurate. This effect is further enhanced by the presence of a bipod. If you have a bipod, it'll allow for more distance, vertical distance between you and the wall you want to support it on, and you can also do it while prone, at which point, go ahead.
You can even support weapons that don't have a bipod, provided that the front, or so that the bottom of the weapon is close enough to an object that it can be supported on, such as a low wall or even a rucksack if you've got one. If you drop it on the ground with the drop ruck option in your inventory, you can actually support on weapons on it without bipods.
Another thing you can do with supporting non-bipoded weapons is if you lean around a corner, you can support it on the corner itself. But yeah, deploying a bipoded weapon while prone makes it pretty much like a laser beam, but it also limits your movement speed, or your turning speed, yeah.
Yeah, because because the bipod is deployed, it's like if you try and turn too far to the right or to the left, it's going to start dragging on the ground, so you're going to have to like shift a little bit, like strafe left, strafe right, forward, backward, whatever, and then reset the bipod again. You can kind of get past that if you use aiming dead zone, though.
But generally speaking, you're not going to support a bipoded weapon when you're prone unless you have heavy wounds. Otherwise, there's no real point to it. If your aim is perfect, then you might as well just be prone without supporting the weapon. But if you're wounded and by default you have a lot of shake, deploying the bipod actually takes away like almost all of it.
And also keep in mind that deploying a weapon won't, like, it'll make you very accurate, but it will not stop effects such as wind and the distance of the shot.
Which we'll get to right now. The next factors are entirely situational and generally speaking out of your control. Engagement distance, not so much, but wind and other things most certainly. The further, obviously all of you know that the further away you go from a target, the higher you need to aim to compensate for the bullet drop, unless you can re-zero your scope. At this point you should also note that the bullet itself becomes less effective. I think at around like 900 or 800 meters, a 7.62 NATO will not kill in a single shot to the head.
And that's just a problem with Arma.
Yeah, but basically they lose kinetic energy, if you will. They also, the further away you go, the more they'll be affected by wind. Easiest way to gauge wind for any shooting that you don't need high accuracy for, hold left shift and press K. Right now, you should see on the top left of your screen a green arrow pointing towards the top of your screen. Yeah. This is basically the wind. This is equivalent to you basically sticking your finger up in the air and trying to gauge it like that. It works. It works very well for quick situations and gives you a general idea of what the wind's like.
The color of the arrow will change based on the speed of the wind as well. If it's something like white or gray, there's hardly any wind at all. If it's a deep purple or red, it's very high winds, up to 5 meters per second or more. And then it'll shift through oranges, yellows, and lime green as it is right now.
And that should be pretty much it for the elements of a good shot. If you combine all of these, you'll get basically the list of things you need to look out for when shooting.
Don't forget sight pictures, Senior Chief.
That's another topic.
Well, it's an element of a good shot.
Oh yeah. Generally speaking, you want to aim at the chest of a target. You don't want to go for his head unless...
Well, hang on. It's not necessarily aimed at the chest. That's just like...
Aim at center mass.
Right. You want to aim at the center of mass, or the center of the target, of that most of it which you can see.
You want to maximize your chances of hitting.
Right, so if you're shooting at a standing target, the center of mass will be his chest. If he's laying down, then it's going to be his upper torso because he's laying flat, so it's practically going to be his head.
But aim at the biggest place you can unless you are doing some precision shooting. This will maximize your chances of hitting the target and minimize other factors. It'll minimize the effects of your zero distance, minimize the effects of wind. Even if it drifts a little left or little right, it should still either catch the target in its arm or right torso, which is an extremely wounding shot.
Any hit is better than no hit.
Yeah. Whereas if you aim for the head, let's say you're 300 meters away, that's a heck of a small target. And if you get your shot off and it misses even by like a few centimeters, you're not going to be scratching anything. You're just flat out missing. Next up, we have ballistics. First topic in ballistics, surface or target penetration. Higher caliber rounds will punch through things, objects, walls, whatever. Most bullets will go through glass and other very thin items such as sheet metal or even wood or cloth, if you should find that. The higher you go, the more thicker the material it can penetrate. Rounds can also at times penetrate targets, go from one to another. Cannot remember the term for this, but it might be a consideration if you're dealing in a high crowd situation. Overpenetration is what it's called.
Terminal ballistics.
That too. But I was talking about overpenetration, which means...
That's terminal ballistics.
Are they the same thing?
I believe so.
Okay. So that might be something to consider when you're dealing with a situation with a lot of civilians or things you do not want to hit. Another thing, the bullet's ability to penetrate things should diminish with distance, as again they will lose kinetic energy over distance.
Basically, if you're firing at a mud wall from 50 meters with a 50 cal, nearly all of your shots are going to go through it, as opposed to if you're shooting at the same mud wall with the same 50 cal from 900 meters away, only a few might penetrate it.
Next up, ricochets. Prime concern for ricochets are going to be high volume weaponry like miniguns. Obviously, most of you have seen the multiple ricochets that a minigun produces, visible thanks to its numerous tracer rounds. This effect is present for pretty much every weapon, and in the case of assault rifles and small arms, the main area where you're going to meet ricochets is going to be close quarters battle. They exist, and usually, unless you're actually looking for them, you won't see them, but they are there. I've had cases where I've actually, I think, been nicked by a few ricochets from friendlies or stuff like that. So keep that in mind when shooting into a tight hallway or a small room, especially at shallow angles. And finally, fragmentation or explosive fragmentation. This is particularly for any types of explosives. They will have fragmentation. The main way that 40mm grenades and hand grenades damage you is not by the concussive force of the blast, but by the shell fragments that are created and dispersed as they explode. For 40mm, the kill range is actually extremely large. It's somewhere around 20 meters, where you can get hit by frag and actually get seriously wounded, which is why shooting a 40mm close range or in a closed space is not a good idea.
Ill-advised.
Yeah. Especially if you're in a vehicle, you may quickly find your tires shredded.
Well, yeah, if your vehicle's armed with a grenade launcher.
Yeah. Also, some vehicle weaponry have explosive effect, most notably stuff like the Bradley. These do not produce fragmentation as far as I'm aware, they just deal concussive and explosive damage.
Another thing to note is that high explosive rounds, such as 25mm Bushmaster, 30mm cannon from, say, like the Apache or anything, like just any high explosive rounds out of any kind of like chain gun or autocannon do not ricochet.
Because they are set to explode on contact.
Right.
Okay, now we get into the Pullet flight path and the sight picture and how those two things are tied to one another and how they're not. The biggest thing to note about this is simulated in Arma 2, is that your bullet leaves the barrel at about, how much would you say, 20 centimeters, 10 centimeters below your actual
2
scope.
inches.
I don't
About
do
two,
inches.
well, it's about 2 inches if you're American, or you know what I mean.
Yeah, basically, you see over your barrel, and thus you see over the place where your bullet exits the barrel. This will cause problems if you're fighting in a situation where you've got a small mound in front of you. Sometimes you may have noticed that rounds actually impact in front of you, like just 10 centimeters away or something like that, even though through your sights you have a perfect line of sight. This is because your barrel is lower and the bullets exit lower. This is something to consider when shooting at things like this, or when shooting in situations like that.
Right, just always make sure that if you're up on a piece of cover, that your barrel clears the cover.
Another way to note this effect is if, let's say, your rifle is 0 to 300 meters with a AHawk scope. If you stop walking closer to your target and continuously fire, you'll see your rounds start basically...
They'll start kind of walking up a little bit.
And then walking back down. It's weird, but that's how it goes. There's an illustration in your recruit handbook which you can see. You'll see that there's this single steady line, and then there's a curved line. The right, and they intersect in two places. One of those places being the zero range, or the 0 point. Also note that in Arma 2, you generally hold your weapon up against your right shoulder.
Everybody's
Thus
right-handed.
thus effectively you aim with your right eye. This is something to keep in mind when shooting around cover, when shooting around trees, or when taking up positions in such areas.
Just
You want to make
because just because you may not be able to see past the cover doesn't mean that you can't, lean your head over and look through your sights and still be able to shoot.
Yeah, it's generally advisable to go around with the right side towards the exposed area and the left side covered, because you need to reveal less of yourself at that point. Whereas if you move left around the building, for example, you need to lean the entirety of your left side of the body, and then, only then, can you shoot with the gun that's on the right side of the body. Tracers. There are a few kinds of tracers simulated in Arma 2. There's the daylight ones, or the bright ones, which you'll see when miniguns are firing, when M2s are firing, or when you've got a machine gunner or a standard rifleman who has brought tracer rounds. Generally speaking, Blue 4 has red, and Op 4 has green tracers. Op 4 heavy weapons, however, do use red tracers, like the Zeus. So those are daylight tracers. They are very bright and useful for coordinating AR fire or notifying of targets. Note that they burn out at a certain range, which is why if you're engaging targets with an AR at extremely long distances, we're talking, I think, over 600, 700 meters is where they burn out.
I think tracers, they burn out anywhere from 800 to 1,000.
Yeah, so if you happen to be engaging targets at that range with an AR, you may notice the tracers vanish mid-air, but the rounds will still impact. So you can't go off of tracers at that point. But since we are talking about extremely long ranges, generally speaking, you won't see this effect. Another set of tracers are dim tracers, things which you will only see with night vision. I have noted an effect similar to dim tracers with 249er standard rounds. Basically, if you go in on a night mission, you put in your night vision on and you shoot a 249er close to the ground, you will see small pockets of light zip across the ground where your bullets are going. Those should be dim tracers. And the effect of dim tracers. Basically, they're very faint and visible only with night vision goggles. Engagement of targets further away from zero range, and engagement of moving targets. As we already discussed, if the target is beyond your zero range, you will have to adjust by raising your weapon higher. Some weapon sights do have markings for this. I know the ACOG does. If you know how to read it, the Spectre DR does have markings for it. Several machine gun sights do have markings for that, most notably the M145 Elkin. I think it's an Elkin, which is my favorite AR sight.
Yeah, it's Elkin.
That has markings for various ranges. Other sights, or if you're engaging with iron sights or non-magnified optics, you're just going to have to go by feel. There are ways to range targets with different sights. Some optics do have built-in range finding systems. I think the Spectre DR has one scale on the right side of it. Others have other methods, but I am not sure if the ACOG has one. If it does, I will have to look into it.
I believe the ACOG, at least the Trigicon ACOG, as far as I'm aware, only has the range markers below the 0 point.
Okay, then you'll
but certain Op4 scopes, such as I didn't really know that the PSO, that has actual markings on the side based on the height of the target, but you guys don't need to worry about that now.
And if there is no rangefinder, you'll either have to go by feel, or if you have an accurate eye, you can guesstimate the range yourself and provide further and get further guidance from noting the places where your bullets end up splashing the ground. Also, as we discussed, at distances, wind is going to be a bigger factor. And just generally starts being a factor beyond the standard 300 meter zero range. Engagement of moving targets. The speed and the angle of which the target is moving away from determine how far you need to lead the target. If the target is moving at a shallow angle or completely in line with you, at that point little to no lead is required. But if the target is moving at worst case scenario a 90-degree angle from you, you need to give it a lot of lead.
And also gauge it on the distance.
Yeah.
So if a target's relatively close to you, moving parallel, or perpendicular to you, you can probably give it maybe half a body's width or a full body width of lead, based on the distance, and then at farther ranges you'll have to give multiple body lengths.
Yeah, because you need to not only compensate for the target itself moving, but also the travel time of your rounds. There are methods for aiming, for shooting at moving targets. Some people know how to do it real good. I would personally recommend, if you don't have any specific method, just put as many rounds downrange as you can, and you'll either get a feel for it or you'll eventually hit the target.
A lot of, when it comes to lead targets, will come with experience on the field
Yeah.
for you guys. And then if you guys need to, if you're proficient at it, you can set up scenarios in the editor for yourselves to practice.
Next up, different weapon sights. We've already mentioned the whole slew. We've mentioned non-magnified, holographic. Holographic, non-magnified are usually EOTechs. Then we also have the red dots, which are aim points. Iron sights. I also mentioned the Trichicon ACOG, which is the standard infantry magnified optic.
Basically, the main sight types that you guys need to worry about are just iron sights, close quarter optics such as red dots and holographics, magnified optics such as the ACOG or the RCO, and anything higher than that is considered such as a sniper rifle optic.
You've also got weird ones like the...
Or mil dot scope, sorry, that's what I was getting at.
You've also got weird ones like the Leopold short dot, which have variable magnification. And you will have sight systems with backup sights. A lot of AR sights, scopes have backup systems on them. The M145 Elcan has a set of rear irons on top of it, or a set of backup irons on top of it. Spectre DR scopes have a non-magnification switch and a non-magnified lens and a...
There's also a set of backup iron sights on the top. A lot of Trichicon ACOGs can be equipped with tiny red dots on the top or backup iron sights.
Yeah. And then the most standard of non-magnified optics, they just are. Nothing magical about them. Unfortunately, we cannot, or unfortunately, Armor 2 doesn't really simulate proper mechanics of reflex sights and how they would work in reality.
If you guys have played the Armor 3 Alpha, you know what he's talking about. In real life, those kind of optics, red dots and holographic sights, the sight itself is projected out towards infinity, so that no matter where you're looking through the scope or the sight, the point of aim is always going to be at that infinite point where the barrel is supposed to be pointing. As Senior Chief said, the Armor 2 does not simulate that at all. Your point of aim is just floating in glass, like it's like a piece of paper.
They're effectively painted on.
Basically, yeah.
Last set in the lecture, rules of engagement. Generally speaking, there are 3 sets of ROE.
Occasionally, you might hear guys call them row or ask about row. That's just what they're talking about.
And obviously all of these are subject to field manipulation in accordance with the situation itself.
Mainly these will just be fire control methods issued by your team leaders, but it's up to you guys to know what each one means.
Going from most strict to least strict, we have weapons hold or hold fire. A hold fire being the command with which you call it. And this is basically a stealth command.
Well, Senior, hang on. There's a little bit of a discrepancy in your handbook here.
Do tell.
Weapons hold does not necessarily equal hold fire.
Not
and-
necessarily, but it can.
Right, but in common practice, weapons hold is to refer to, say, do not fire unless it's an immediate emergency and we have not come under contact yet. Hold fire is usually given out to indicate, like ceasefire almost.
It depends on the situation in which it's called. If you're briefing up and you ask about row and your commanding officer says hold fire, then it's going to be
Or
weapons
team
hold.
leader.
Yeah. Anyways, weapons hold. As I said, stealth command. You are to not engage unless fired upon, or on initiative-based tactics if there is an enemy that poses an immediate threat to you. So basically, he has noticed you, he's aiming down his weapons, and he is about to fire. At that point, you can engage with your own initiative. Just be
mindful of
consider
the
it.
situation around that.
Weapons tight. This is the default and most common set of row. You will only engage targets positively identified, and generally speaking, you will call for permission before starting contact, initiating contact. If the enemy is already engaged you, you are free to return fire. And then the laxest of all, weapons free. You are clear to engage all hostile targets.
Or any contact that you can relatively identify is hostile.
Yeah, and
Who'd we lose?
Alanis.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it for the lecture part. Any questions?
Negative.
I got one, Senior.
Sure.
In the handbook, it says for weapons free, hostile target is permitted at the discretion of the operator. No limits other than IFF. What does that stand for?
Identify friend or foe.
Exactly what he said.
Basically means you need to be, or you should be 100% sure that you're engaging hostile and not friendlies.
Copy. Thank you.
Also, thank you for bringing out the spelling. Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I was going to mention, or I was going to ask if anyone didn't know what IFF stood for, but right on the ball there, nice. Kind of asked it for me.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
If I'm moving right while I'm firing, does that mean the bullet will travel slightly right with me, or will it just continue straight forward?
It would move to the right very, very slowly. Like, if you're strafing to the right while shooting, it'll barely be affected because the speed at which... Well, okay, go ahead.
If you move to the right, your bullet would be shot from your left-hand side. Hence, it would be on your left. It would not be moving to the right.
Yeah, I was more of thinking if I'm sitting in like a car and firing on another car traveling.
That's going to be something for convoy training.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Out of scope of this this class right here.
But basically, as an infantryman with a handheld rifle, you don't have to worry about that too much because your bullets are just going to be moving so fast that it has a negligible effect.
Okay. Just wondering if Arma actually simulated that or not.
Well, here's the thing. It's not about simulation. Just like what Senior Chief and Chief Warrant Officer Thorzer said, the wind deflects the bullet as it goes further out, because as it goes further out, it loses momentum, it loses power. But out of your barrel, it has full power. There's not a single wind in this world, hurricane, tornado, typhoon, whatever you want to call it, will move that bullet out of the barrel's trajectory. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you running to the left is not going to change the bullet's or the round's trajectory, period.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions? Okay,
Alright.
well, I guess we'll take that as a no. Senior?